Serious, what are some of the most mysterious unexplained events recorded in history? We know, from accounts in several sources, that ancient Byzantine military forces attacked rival navies, and, rarely, armies, with a primitive type of pressurized flamethrower. Our best effort cannot, however, discern what they used for fuel or how exactly they overcame the engineering problems involved. Lots of different theories exist, but none have been proven. We only know what it came to be called, Greek fire. This isn't well documented anywhere, and has been reported to be a hoax, but it still fascinates me. In the early 50s, a guy showed up at Tokyo airport with a passport from a country that didn't exist called Tord. He had numerous world currencies with him, and pointed to Andorra when asked to identify Tord on a map. Tokyo authorities put him in a hotel overnight until they could figure out what was going on, and he disappeared from a guarded room with no trace. Some people call the guy a time traveler. I think, if he existed, he was some kind of organized criminal. The Shag Harbor UFO. Back in the 60s there was a huge flying object seen over the harbor in Nova Scotia where it hovered for a while and it crashed into the water, so in the morning all the fishermen went out to look for debris. Some people claimed to see lights under the water. So some people dived the next morning and they found nothing. Lights were later spotted underwater around the HMC Shelburne. Followed by another underwater ship. Here is the article if anyone is interested. Way more details than I can mention. The Mary Celeste. Found with no life or bodies on board, but with all cargo from the ledger still on board, likely ruling out piracy. None of the crew were ever found. I remember reading a theory that the crew of the ship apparently smelled fumes coming from explosive and stable cargo they were carrying. Fearing an explosion, the entire crew were loaded up into a lifeboat and trailed behind the Mary Celeste with a rope or something. Somehow, the knot or rope came undone and they watched their ship sail off without them. The dancing plague of 1518. I don't understand how people died of dancing and couldn't stop. I will always believe it was fake, but it was widely documented. A few of my psych courses suggested its spread was likely caused by a patient zero triggering a herd mentality. That is, people bought into the dancing plague being a real thing and so it became real. I forgot a lot of the info about this one, but the music on the dark side of the moon, probably faked. Pretty simple story. During 1969, during the Apollo 10 mission, for 1 hour they had to orbit behind the moon. During this period, NASA lost touch with them and they were on their own. At one point, they start to receive a whistling signal. When it starts, they begin talking about how it sounds like outer space music. The only concern is that they have no reaction to it. They just take it as something expected. The WOW signal, perhaps the only possible extraterrestrial radio source we've ever received. It came from a barren area in the Sagittarius constellation and might have been a passing spaceship or something as it was never detected again. It got its name from the scientist writing WOW next to the readout. Personally I would have written what in the actual duck. Harold Holt, Australian Prime Minister when swimming in 1967, disappeared and his body never recovered. No one is exactly sure what happened to him, but he was presumed dead. The surf that day was said to be pretty fierce, and Holt was possibly suffering from a heart condition that had made him pass out earlier that year. He also had almost drowned at least once while skin diving in 1967. It's pretty likely that his health problems acted up when he was too far out, and he got pulled under and away. The mystery is that nobody knows what issue specifically caused it, but it's more or less known that he was suffering from a shoulder issue and a possible heart issue, both of which would have prevented him from surviving the surf. The Nazca Lines. People drew huge pictures in the sand that no one could see until hundreds of years later when airplanes were invented. Well, they thought the sun was literally God, so they were making those drawings for him, up high. At least, that's the easiest explanation. Gods are always in the sky for ancient cultures, and for ours too, so there's at least one reason to build stuff that can be seen from up there. Elisa, for those of you that don't know, in January 2013, Elisa checked into Cecil Hotel. A video of her last known time she was seen alive was released, and a few weeks after she disappeared, she was found in the hotel's water tank. Due to the size of the tanks, requiring you to use a ladder to reach the top from the outside, and the weight of their lids, she couldn't have gotten in and closed the lids herself. The Dyatlov Pass incident in 1959, Igor Dyatlov, hence the name, and 8 friends were trekking the Ural Mountains. Dyatlov said that he would send out a telegram when they returned. 8 days after he said he would send it with no word, a search party started looking for them. When their tent was found, it was abandoned and damaged, and apparently cut open from the inside. Their bodies weren't there, but their belongings were. Footprints were found going away from the campsite, some left by people in socks, with only one shoe, and some even barefoot. Their bodies were found in various places away from the campsite wearing very little clothing, some only in their underwear. I cannot remember the details, but during the early parts of the Cold War, a Soviet submarine sank. Knowledge of it was intercepted, but the Soviets guarded this information very tightly and, as far as I recall, never really came out with it. One theory I heard is that Russian vessels were rigged such that an unauthorized launch of its nuclear weapons would cause them to immediately detonate. Like by design as a failsafe. I don't know if that's true or not, but whatever I read about this suggested it was a fact that they had this failsafe. Another was that the British had been able to sabotage these weapons after intercepting communications that the Soviets were going to launch a nuclear strike against the US. Both theories rely on the Soviets having tried to launch 2 nukes and starting WW3. Either they were unauthorized and detonated on board, or they were sabotaged and blew up upon launch. More likely, it's some random accident guarded because it was a nuclear-armed sub which sank. But I don't think any accepted answer ever came out. Here are some I am fascinated by. The Salish Sea missing feet. 16 feet have washed up on beaches along the coast of Washington, United States, and British Columbia, Canada. It's likely most of the feet belong to suicide jumpers who've leaped off bridges into the water. Some feet still remain unidentified, as in nobody knows who they belong to. Tara Calico. While there are plenty of missing persons cases from around the world, this one is pretty chilling for a disturbing photograph. Tara vanished in New Mexico in September 1988. In June 1989, a woman discovered a Polaroid in a Florida parking lot which showed a girl bearing similar resemblance to Tara, as well as an unknown young boy who appeared to be bound and with tape over their mouths and could be in the back of a van, in the trunk of a car, or in a room somewhere. Supposedly a windowless cargo van was seen near where the photo was found and was gone when the woman exited the store and found the picture. Not necessarily a mysterious unexplained event, but surely creepy. Tunguska event. In June 1908, a huge explosion decimated 80 million trees in a 2,000 km square area and caused no human casualties. It's theorized to be a meteor that disintegrated before it hit the ground because there was no impact crater found. I find that very interesting that such a cataclysmic occurrence happened, but we don't fully know exactly what it was. The sea people that came, wrecked Egypt's sheet, then were never heard from again. We don't know where they come from or where they went. That was the one I was going to say. They wiped out 4 major civilization, Mycenae, Minos, Hittites, and Assyrians. And nearly broke Egypt. Brought on the Greek Dark Ages. They know, not really. It wasn't like it was one nation going to different civilizations and wiping them out. There was a massive drought in the area that affected crops and caused massive migrations. When people have to abandon their cities, they travel elsewhere, and back then it meant that a ton of people were fleeing across the Mediterranean in search of food. Many of them ended up raiding these 4 civilizations who were already struggling and on the verge of collapse thanks to the drought famine. It was almost certainly different groups attacking each of the civilizations, and they weren't some badass warrior tribe, but just desperate people in desperate times. Dan Carlin has a pretty good podcast on this event, and there are tons of great lectures on YouTube about this. It's really not as mysterious as it seems. It was the droughts that caused the collapse of civilization in that part of the world, save for Egypt, and the sea peoples were simply a symptom. Disappearance of Brian Schaffer creeps me out. In April 2006, a guy is seen on CCTV entering a bar in Columbus, Ohio with friends, and is again spotted briefly outside talking to two girls. He then goes back into the bar and is never seen or heard from again. CCTV does not see him leave the bar, and there was no other way he could have left without being seen. The more I read about it, the more confusing and frustrating it gets to try and theorize what could have happened to him. Interestingly, a ping from his phone was detected 14 miles northwest, 5 months later. Edit: I had actually made a mistake in the comments below. The camera at the back door was not rigged to go off when it detected movement. Instead, it was a continuously recording camera that panned and zoomed when it detected someone coming through the door. So investigators could watch hours of footage and determine this was not the case here. Gloria Ramizaka, the toxic lady. About 8:15 p.m. on the evening of the 19th of February, 1994, Ramirez, suffering from the effects of advanced cervical cancer, was brought into the emergency room of Riverside General Hospital by paramedics. She was extremely confused and was suffering from tachycardia and Cheyne-Stokes respiration. The medical staff injected her with diazepam, midazolam, and lorazepam to sedate her. When it became clear that Ramirez was responding poorly to treatment, the staff tried to defibrillate her heart. At that point, several people saw an oily sheen covering Ramirez's body, and some noticed a fruity, garlic-like odor that they thought was coming from her mouth. A registered nurse named Susan Kane attempted to draw blood from Ramirez's arm and noticed an ammonia-like smell coming from the tube. She passed the syringe to Julie Gorkinski, a medical resident, who noticed manila-colored particles floating in the blood. At this point, Kane fainted and was removed from the room. Shortly thereafter, Gorkinski began to feel nauseated. Complaining that she was lightheaded, she left the trauma room and sat at a nurse's desk. A staff member asked her if she was okay, but before she could respond, she also fainted. Maureen Welch, a respiratory therapist who was assisting in the trauma room, was the third to pass out. The staff was then ordered to evacuate all emergency room patients to the parking lot outside the hospital. Overall, 23 people became ill and 5 were hospitalized. A skeleton crew stayed behind to stabilize Ramirez. At 8:50 p.m., after 45 minutes of CPR and defibrillation, Ramirez was pronounced dead from kidney failure related to her cancer.